Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our AGM. So people are able to get a seat and we'll get started. Well, welcome to the AGM of FoLA. The meeting will be live streamed as well, and so welcome to all those people who are viewing this on live stream. I probably travelled the greatest distance to get here this evening. At 9 o'clock this morning I was still in Perth. And I was the first one to get here because I wasn't going to drive all the way home and come back again. So that's live. So we've got some procedures to go through. I can declare that we do have a quorum, which is important for an annual meeting. So I presume you've all signed in there, and if there's any apologies to record them as well. For our annual meeting, we normally have a devotion at the beginning of the annual meeting, and tonight we're very fortunate to have the Assistant Bishop of the LCA NZ, Pastor Stephen Schultz, to provide the devotion for us, and we welcome him to the first meeting he's ever attended of FoLA.
Thank you for that. Yes, welcome everyone, and certainly welcome to those online. So you've just heard from the person who's come from the longest distance. I came from district office next door. So now I was reliably informed that this AGM marks the 100th anniversary of the Lutheran Archives. Is that correct? Perhaps. Yeah, well, there you go. So anyway, I went back to 1926 because that was a touch before my time, and a number of interesting things happened there. Alfred Hitchcock released his first film as director. Anyone know the name of the film? Anyone there? No. The Pleasure Garden. Never heard of it. The author A.A. Milne released the book. What book did A.A. Milne release? Winnie the Pooh. Good work. Harry Houdini died. Of what? That's what's thought, isn't it? But no, he actually died of appendicitis. He didn't die of drowning. So, no, it wasn't related to water at all. Apparently, he got punched a number of times just to show how strong he was. Then he developed complications and died 9 days later. The first liquid fuel rocket was launched. How's that going for us currently? Not good. On May the 9th, Richard Byrd claimed the first flight of the North Pole. However, it was later discovered that in his diary, the writing suggests that he turned back 150 miles short because of an oil leak. And that diary was only discovered in 1996, 70 years later. So 3 days after May the 9th, the actual first flight over the North Pole was achieved by the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen. So history is dependent on keeping good records, I would have thought. However, Richard was the took the undisputed first flight over the South Pole in 1929. So he did achieve something. History matters, and the correct recording of history matters. But I'm guessing that you know that. We see that in the Bible and how careful they were at maintaining records and genealogies and the like, tracing the lineage of the Messiah dependent on it. As we're approaching another Easter celebration, we're very mindful of all of the different prophecies that are connected to Jesus as the Messiah. And if it wasn't for the record of those genealogies, then they wouldn't have been able to sort of clearly articulate his lineage. Post-exile, and the Bible verse I'd like to share tonight is from Ezra. Post-exile to Babylon, Ezra and Nehemiah were attempting to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. They faced fierce opposition and were forced to drop tools at a particular time. But they pleaded with the foreign king Darius that a predecessor of his had authorised the rebuild. So what happened? Well, they went to the archives, and that's recorded in Scripture, in Ezra chapter 6. It wasn't the Lutheran Archives that they went to, but King Darius issued an order, and they searched in the archives stored in the treasury at Babylon. A scroll was found in the citadel of Ecbatana in the province of Media, and this was written on it. Memorandum. In the first year of King Cyrus, the king issued a decree concerning the temple of God in Jerusalem. Let the temple be rebuilt as a place to represent sacrifices, and let its foundations be laid. And he also authorised that all expenses should be paid by the kingdom in terms of that. Really important record to be kept. So Darius, having read that in the archives, declared, now then Tatanai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar-Bozani, and you other officials of that province, stay away from there. Don't interfere with the work on this temple of God. Let the governor of the Jews and the Jewish elders rebuild this house of God on its site. And he also commanded that all the materials they required for it should be provided. So keeping records and accurate records is really critical. So as I come here, yes, it might be my first official meeting of FoLA, but I'm certainly very familiar with the work of the Lutheran Archives and the different presentations and how important it is to our church. So I do give thanks to God for the work of the archives, not just for preserving our history, but also for the many efforts to bring that history and the stories from it to light, because those stories are very much the lifeblood of our church. So God bless you in your work. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise for the way that you have acted through the course of history. And we thank you for the many people that saw fit to record that in so many different ways and many different forms. And for those who preserved those records and continue to preserve them. I ask for your blessing upon the work of the Lutheran Archives and on the friends of the Lutheran Archives who support that work and share the stories. Guide this meeting tonight and may this work continue well into the future. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you. For those people who are watching this live stream, probably the annual meeting might take 30, 45 minutes, so just bear with us before we get to our topic. We'll follow through the agenda as being presented to you, and the first item is adopting the minutes of our AGM last year, and they've been attached here. Our committee looked at them during the course of the year, and I don't know if there's any corrections, but we don't know of any others. Are there any corrections that any member noticed here tonight? If not, would somebody who was present at that meeting be prepared to move the adoption of those minutes? Thank you, Margaret Modra. Seconded. Dr. Malcolm Peck. Oh. Welcome, because he's not standing on the committee again. So Malcolm Peck, thank you. Then we move on to reports. Probably the least exciting one is Chairman's report. So I'll present this report and I'll abbreviate some of it, and the full report will be published and presented to members in due course. The FoLA committee met shortly after the 2025 AGM to elect its officers for the coming year. All executive positions remained unchanged. Gary Eckerman was welcomed as a new committee member at the AGM. This report covers the 2025 calendar year. Our committee met 6 times and transacted an extensive range of FoLA business. We again organised 9 monthly general membership meetings and all were live streamed. We continue to be very grateful to the team of volunteers who make all this happen. Unfortunately, last month we had difficulties with it and the North Adelaide congregation had to get external help to get that right again. We continue to welcome feedback from anyone who view the proceedings on live stream or subsequently on YouTube. Attendances at our general meetings continue to be lower than pre-pandemic levels. Every effort is being made on many levels to improve attendances, but there is an extensive online audience each month from around Australia and internationally. Most presentations online attract an audience of at least 200 viewers. One topic in October 2024 entitled "Don't Argue with Germans" on the Niels Flat churches has now been viewed by over 580 people, and it is still growing. We also encourage regular online viewers who are not FoLA members to become subscribing members of FoLA, as there is an additional cost to live stream each meeting. The following is a brief summary of the topics and speakers of our general meetings in 2025. Basically, I'll just outline the topic and speakers, and the rest of that detail you can read in the written report. In February, Pastor Mads Christensen, a Danish pastor in New Zealand, and retired Flinders University historian David Hilliard gave a very detailed account of his life. We understand that there were many New Zealand people that watched this on live stream. March, the Byer family divided by myself as a direct descendant of the Byer family. Again, this was viewed by more than our regular viewers, with relatives and friends in Germany, Poland, Texas and other parts of America, and quite extensively around Australia. So these topics do attract additional viewers. April, Memories of Kaniba Mission by Elizabeth Buck. This is also a very popular presentation, and that number of viewers is continuing to grow. She spent her childhood years at Kaniba. May, Talking Together, Sherman's Missionary Diary, Adelaide and Port Lincoln by Dr. Greg Lockwood, and he's also prepared a book on this here, and there's more details in the story. Daniel Slinky, Barossa Entrepreneur by Philip Mann. Philip is here tonight. July, Life on the Far Side, Adventures Undergone While Investing in a Forgotten Past. It's a fascinating story by John Strelo, who's put so much effort into documenting the life and work of his grandparents, Carl and Frieda and Kaiser. So he's prepared an e-book which is available to read on this topic. August, Farmers, Entrepreneurs, Lutheran Clergyman and a Doctor, Germans of Mount Gambier District by Betty Hoof. Initially she was a bit reluctant to do this, but she found so much information in published sources to have a very detailed presentation on that topic. September, Enlightened Aboriginal Futures and the Sandhill Girl, the story of 2 books, and presented by Professors Barry Judd and Catherine Ellinghouse from Melbourne. And this was really in the form of an interview between the 2 speakers on pre-prepared questions. October, Gottlieb Blaise, Missionary to the Maori, by Bethany Pietsch over here, who put in a lot of effort into recording his missionary work in New Zealand and later in Australia as well. And considering that he started his life in Germany, did some of his studies in America, ministered to the Maori, and also here, also in parishes in Australia. I suppose the fascinating thing about him and his wife is they had 15 children. There's not too many manses in Australia at the moment that would accommodate 15 children. A detailed report of the monthly meeting topics is included in the FoLA newsletter during the year. All presentations are also available for viewing on the Friends of Lutheran Archives YouTube facility. We sincerely thank our Secretary, Chris Lockwood, for her attention to detail in recording our committee and general meeting minutes and our other correspondence during the year. Our Treasurer, Shirley Golding, has done an amazing job again in keeping our books up to date, and she also manages some funds for FoLA Queensland, in addition to past German Heritage Research Group seminars, and that money's to be spent, hopefully, on printing proceedings of previous year's seminars. FoLA V, which is FoLA Victoria, has ceased operations. We sincerely thank John Nowak and some former FoLA V members for their patience in getting this process finalised with the relevant Victorian Government Department to legally close down that incorporated association and pay all exit fees. It was an arduous task, and it just kept going on, and I don't think that an incorporated association here has to go through all that. The residual balance of $863.47 was transferred to our FoLA account on the 5th of December 2025. We are again very grateful to our program coordinator Margaret Modra for her efforts in liaising with guest speakers, booking the meeting venue, contacting FoLA personnel to manage the live stream desk, introduce and thank speakers and personnel to report on meeting topics for inclusion in our FoLA newsletter. Margaret continues to promote our meetings in parish bulletins in city, suburban and regional areas. We are endeavouring to spread the scope of passing information about our meetings to a wider audience within the Lutheran Church and beyond. The quarterly FoLA News continues to be a most valuable newsletter to pass on information to our members, and we particularly thank our editor John Temmie, Lois Sweck and many others behind the scenes who prepare each edition. We're very grateful to Andrew Waldheater, who assists in producing the newsletter, and to John Schultz for his expertise and efforts in many spheres, including email or posting the newsletters and other notices, etc. to members. We again encourage members to give their email addresses to John so that as many newsletters as possible can be emailed to members rather than expensive posting them in the mail. Our committee recognises the continuing great effort from John Temmie in editing the newsletter by awarding him life membership of FoLA at our general meeting on the 18th of September 2025. John has been a member of FoLA committee and newsletter editor since 2007. So it's a really well-deserved honour. The annual FoLA Journal has again been edited very thoroughly by Dr. Dean Sweck. We sincerely appreciate his efforts as editor. He has agreed to be the journal editor for one more year, so we need to find someone to fill that very responsible position in 2027. He has been our journal editor since 2014. And when I first joined the committee, I can recall him saying he'll do it for one more year. That sound familiar, Dean? Yeah, so we might have to convince him next year too. We also sincerely thank Lyle Kupke for his very meticulous proofreading of the entire text, Shirley Golding for formatting the publication, and John and Caroline Schultz for the distribution of the journal. It continues to be a very high quality standard annual publication of FoLA. It is clearly evident the Archives team is very busy and that Lutheran Archives is a most valuable resource for the Lutheran Church and the general community. We were very saddened to learn that Rachel Cookle resigned from the Archives in May 2025 after serving 16 years, the first 5 as archivist and then 11 years as director. Over the years, she has been very successful in gaining grants for a wide range of archives projects, and we sincerely thank her for her tremendous effort, apart from all the other aspects of managing the archives. FoLA awarded her life membership of our organisation in May, and she was guest of honour at our committee lunch in November. To date, she has not been replaced as director. We wish her well in her new employment at ALWS, Australian Lutheran World Service. The 3 current archivists continue to do a great job and keep our committee informed of archives matters at each of our meetings. Jodie Brooke has been appointed as the Acting Business Manager of Lutheran Archives and has been invited to attend FoLA committee meetings. We are very grateful that we received a bequest from the estate of the late Mrs Helen Gordon of $31,513, and we gifted it to the Lutheran Archives to be used for specific projects, and perhaps they were reported in their report. Pastor Malcolm Peck did not seek re-election at our AGM. We think that's the case. And we sincerely thank him for his services to our organisation since 2016. He took on leadership of the Youth Ministry History Project for a number of years to collate data on recollections of youth ministry around Australia. Sales are continuing on the occasional publication entitled Aboriginal Land Rights and Self-Determination at Hermannsburg, 1972-1982, which was published by FoLA in 2022 and reprinted in 2024. John Schubert from Victoria has completed a very comprehensive manuscript on the extended Carville family, and it was published by FoLA in 2025. FoLA was successful in gaining a South Australian History Fund grant of $2,000 to contribute towards the cost of publishing the book. John Schubert spent many years of meticulous research to complete the manuscript. The 184-page book includes an amazing 54 pages of endnotes. The book, entitled The Other Carvilles, Brandenburg to the Barossa, was launched at a special event at Lungmole Lutheran Church at Tanunda on 25th of October 2025 by John Angus, a direct descendant of George Fife Angus, who advanced the passage money of those early boatloads of passengers from Germany to South Australia. Lungmole Church was a very appropriate venue for this launch, as Pastor Carville spent most of his ministry life in South Australia living at and serving the Lungmole congregation, and nearly all of the original Carville family are buried in the Lungmole Cemetery. The launch also included a very complimentary email message from Dr. Anita Maksimovic, museum curator from Zielona Góra, Poland, who has taken a deep personal and professional interest in Pastor Carville and the early emigrants from that former Greenberg region to South Australia. She was very impressed with this book. John Schubert has very graciously donated his manuscript to FoLA. This book has been so popular that a reprint was required late in 2025. The German Heritage Research History Month Group Seminar was again held in Lungmole Lutheran Church at Tanunda on the 10th of May 2025. The seminar topic was Finders, Keepers, Storytellers, Exploring German Histories. A number of topics were presented by FoLA members. The membership status of our organisation at the end of the current financial year was 233 financial and life members. We encourage new members, including those who may watch our meetings live stream or on YouTube, as our membership has declined significantly in recent years. We thank all members who regularly assist FoLA in so many ways, both at the archives and at our general meetings and other activities. We encourage all members to continue to take an active interest in FoLA and to invite others to become members. Finally, my sincere thanks to the FoLA committee for their tireless efforts again during this past year. I trust that this summary accurately reflects the activities of FoLA this past year, and we look forward to your excellent support of FoLA events again in 2026. Respectfully submitted. Are there any queries that you have of this little report? No? Is somebody prepared to move the adoption of the report? Thank you. Ben Hollister, seconded. Gilbert returning. All in favour that it be accepted? Thank you. I can sleep better now tonight. We'll move on then to the Treasurer's report. I won't expect Shirley to read everything out line by line, but the Treasurer's report is included in with your folder of reports for the AGM, but I'll invite Shirley to come forward and make comments.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening, people. With regards to the Treasurer's report, the actual audited report was sent out with the AGM, and there's a copy over there, so I won't be going through that. A major change to FoLA's financial system was the opening of a new bank account with Bank SA. That was in December, 3 months ago. This is in addition to FoLA's LLL account. On several occasions, people tried to transfer funds from their bank account to FoLA's LLL account, but their bank refused to make the transfer, and that's why we had to open a Bank SA account. The problem is due to the LLL transition from an ADI at-call savings account to an RCDF instant access facility, which some banks do not recognise. Those wishing to transfer funds to FoLA now have a choice between transferring it to the LLL account, which will always remain open, and the Bank SA account. Membership renewals for this year provide the details for the Bank SA account only. As mentioned in the previous year's FoLA holds funds for two other entities which are not under the management of the FoLA committee. They are the funds held on behalf of FoLA Queensland and the funds held on behalf of German Heritage Research Group. The FoLA funds are just over $34,000 at the end of December, and we have a balance in our bequest account, which I'll outline in a moment, and we're holding funds set aside for the Lutheran Archives. So the total of the FoLA funds is just over $52,000. Now, the bequest to FoLA, in February last year, FoLA received advice that it would receive a bequest from the estate of the late Mrs. Helen Gordon. The amount received was $31,513. At its meeting on the 16th of May last year, the FoLA committee resolved that the bequest be gifted to Lutheran Archives in full. At the end of December, the amount of $18,428 has been transferred to the archives for the employment of an expert to work on the artefact collection and archival equipment. Now, membership funds, membership fees for 2026 will remain the same as previous years, and they've been the same for quite a number of years. That is $25 for concession members, $30 for ordinary individual members, $40 for ordinary couple members and $50 for institutional members. The FoLA committee is mindful of the cost of living pressures for many of its members. It is very grateful that members who have donated additional funds of $1,504 in 2025. FoLA, as Jeff has already mentioned, FoLA members receive 4 newsletters during the year and the annual FoLA journal. Now, with regard to the membership numbers, up until 3 years ago, FoLA maintained an average annual membership of around 270 people. This has dropped to the current membership of 220. That is, it will be 220 if all membership fees are paid or renewed by the end of this year. The reasons for non-renewals are the ageing of members, deaths and illness. For the last 2 years, cancellations have been matched by new members, which was good. Annual reduction in membership will, in the future, affect FoLA's ability to provide funds and equipment to Lutheran Archives. As of today, 59 members have not yet removed, and this is quite concerning actually, because that's quite a high number at this time of the year, that there have been such a drop in renewals. As Jeff has already outlined, during the year a new book, The Other Carvels, by John Schubert was printed and is available for sale through FoLA. If you wish to purchase a copy of the book, please see Helen Schubert, and she will arrange for the sale, for the purchase of the book. Now, I'd like to give thanks to Roger Collins, who again kindly audited the financial accounts. Roger has advised that he is prepared to audit next year's accounts. I'd like to thank John Schultz for continuing to promptly provide answers to my questions on memberships, the archive staff for their assistance, and the FoLA committee members for their support. I'd like to, are there any questions? If not, I'd like to move the adoption of the Treasurer's report. Second. Yeah. Thank you.
As I said in my report, Shirley does an amazing job. Now, we move on then to the Lutheran Archives report, and this year it's being presented by Angela Schilling. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Shirley. Both incredible jobs, as usual. Firstly, thanks for having us here tonight. I'd like to acknowledge that we're in Kaurna country, unceded Kaurna country, and give thanks to the Kaurna people for looking after this country, and the stories that have been around on this country have been passed on for thousands and thousands of years before we got here. The archive of stories was very different, and we're very proud to play a part in keeping those archives going at the Lutheran Archives, as well as the stories of the church. So the 2025 year was, at the Lutheran Archives, a very big year. Actually, for those who don't know me, my name's Angela Schilling. I am the collections archivist, one of 3 archivists, along with Bethany Pietsch and Ben Hollister at the archives. So 2025 was a year of great change and movement at the Lutheran Archives, as you may all know, and the changes are still making their way through the archives at 4th Street. First and foremost, a big thing, we lost our director, Rachel Cookle, and we wish her the best in her future endeavours at ALWS, so we get to see her around a bit still, which is nice. Rachel spent 16 years at Lutheran Archives, 11 of those as director, so it was a really big change to see her go, and it was all that Ben and Bethany and I knew as a boss. While her position has not been filled to date, Jodie Brooke has stepped in as our acting business manager. You said, Jeff, maybe that's her actual role title. I didn't know that. She's been a wonderful leader. And so thank you to both Rachel and Jodie for all their work in 2025 and beyond before that. We started work on the exhibition space at Frome Street, and that's now reaching the pointy end, with the physical space nearing completion, being built at the moment, and the stories and photographs being almost complete, and incredible work by Bethany Pietsch working on those stories. Just a lot of time spent digging into the archives for the sharing of those stories. There's still some work to be undertaken before it can open to the public, but we are proud of the collaboration that we've done with the exhibition producer, Lisa McIntosh, our designer, Richard Browning, and the LCA communication team, and Jodie, of course. And we can't wait to share this space with everybody. Lutheran Archives launched its online bookshop in November 2025, and this has been excellent for efficiency, advocacy of the archive, and fundraising for the archive. Thank you to Ben for his hard work in getting the bookshop up. It wasn't just putting a space on the website. It was a long period of negotiation with the financial department of the LCA. So thank you for your patience and your work on that. And thank you also to our volunteer Enid, who populated this site and is still working on it as well, with pictures of books, which we need to look at the covers. Throughout 2025, the LCANZ headquarters moved from Archer Street to Frome Street. The archives were very involved in helping staff understand the records, organise them. Some of those records hadn't been maybe thought about in terms of record keeping for a long time, since the last time that the church did a big move of office or someone came on board. So we helped them, did a bit of record keeping tutorials, and we helped to organise and deposit them, and for also responsible discarding of them. It's been a good project for us to learn where the LCA NZ is in its understanding of record keeping and archives, and also to grow a good relationship with them so we can work best with them in the future and instill a robust record keeping culture. The breadth of users at the archive has been incredible this year, and we've been lucky enough to be part of some wonderful projects, both locally and internationally. Many congregational and parish histories have been written and celebrated, with people using the archives to look back on their communities, and it's really wonderful to be part of that. It kind of happens non-stop, really. Many people have been written about, and some wonderful publications have been worked on in the reading room, including the long work of translating the Sherman Diaries by Greg Lockwood, and which has now been published, and the other Carvels by John Schubert, and incredible work by Helen as well, to put together both of those significant publications. The work undertaken by our volunteers this year has been absolutely outstanding. We now have more volunteers in the volunteer room or on the premises since I would say, the start of the current cohort's staff's time there. We're pretty full for a couple of days a week, and we only have a couple of spaces left on the other days. We have indexed, last year we indexed more than 20,000 names into our database, into our names database, and that's all volunteer work. And we've digitised, Ben and I worked out today, we've digitised over 4,000 images in the last 12 months. And that's nearly 10% of our current images holdings, which also we worked out we will probably never ever get to the end of, because they come in a lot as well. There have been many lists made, many items catalogued, many pages transcribed and translated, and many captions captured. All of this work is done by volunteers who are the backbone of the archive. Without them, no material would be accessible, there would be little to no family history successfully undertaken, and there would be no one to have a cup of tea with. So thank you to all our incredible volunteers. Please stay with us as long as you can, and advocate for anyone who's interested to come and volunteer, especially a new generation of volunteers. You don't even have to be interested in history, you could just love databases. I know some of them. So thank you for your work. It's very inspirational, actually. And I hope to be like that when I am retired. Full of knowledge and skill. It's great. So the Artefacts project, which has been split into two parts, which is the audit of our artefact collection, which was funded by the Helen Gordon bequest through FoLA, and the photography of the artefact collection, which was funded by the National Library's Cultural Heritage Grant. This project began in October 2025 and is still being undertaken. The audit work has been done by Naomi Giles, who has come to us. She did work at UniSA Archives in the Bob Hawke Library with our old archivist Adam, and she also worked at the Architecture Archive at UniSA. She is nearly complete, so she's been auditing and rehousing the collection and just cleaning up the metadata and the intellectual control. And it looks very beautiful in there, so if anyone ever wants to come for a visit and in a few weeks and see the artefact collection, you're more than welcome to. The photography has started and is maybe about a third of the way completed, or maybe halfway. And our photographer is Ian Bond. And soon enough, I'm hoping by the end of the year, we will have a wonderful way for users to digitally explore the collection. At the moment, it's not really accessible, so people will be able to, look at the collection and see these artefacts if they want to. And that's kind of it. Thank you to FoLA for being an unwavering source of support and encouragement for us, both physically at the archive and with your meetings programs and just around the place. Thank you for always advocating for us and having faith in our team. This year, hopefully, will be no different, same amount of collaboration or more. And yeah, thanks again. Do I have to move? Yeah. I have to move. Yeah, does someone want to move the motion for my... Okay, Ben Hollister. And do I have a seconder? Thank you, Margaret. Whoever's... Yeah, cool. All right. Oh, I think I can stay up and do the thing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. The archive staff continue to do an amazing job. Now we go to the elections, and the job of this meeting tonight is to elect members of the committee, and at our next committee meeting, the committee members will elect officers of the committee. So the rules of the organisation are such that we cannot accept nominations on the floor for new committee members. It needs to be done beforehand, and So I'll hand over to Angela, who's going to conduct the elections, and I'll come back to you afterwards.
Okay, I'll stand behind the music stand so I can conduct the elections. So, as returning officer, I declare all the positions on the committee open. Here we've got the nominations for the re-election of current members: Gary Eckerman, Shirley Golding, Dr. Christine Lockwood, Margaret Modra, Jeff Sagenschner, Helen Schubert, John Temmie, Dr. Dean Zweck, and Dr. Lois Zweck. May I have someone to move? Oh. Yeah, this is for re-standing members currently in the committee, re-elected of current committee. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten Bruce. May I have someone to move that these people are re-elected that have been nominated? Thank you, Gilbert. And someone second? Thank you. Sorry, I don't know your name, but Lorraine, thank you. We have one nomination for a new committee member, who is Bruce Dommins. Thank you, Bruce. May I have someone to move that? Thank you, Bethany. And someone to second? Oh, yeah. Margaret, thank you. It's like, I don't know who to choose. We have a nomination for the auditor, Roger Collins, who's the current auditor. May I have someone to move that he stay our auditor, FoLA's auditor? Shirley, you know. And a seconder. Thank you, Helen. And Dean Zweck has nominated to be the ongoing journal editor for the next year. Thank you, Dean, very much. Someone to move that Dean stay? Thank you. And someone to second? Cool, Danny, great, thank you. Oh, Philip, that's right, Philip Mann, and Danny Schmidt. Sorry, I actually didn't know he was taking the minutes. Nice, thanks. I think that's it. I can finish that bit. Cool. Before you go, can you declare them elected? I declare all the positions elected.
Thanks, Angela. I'm sure the committee will endeavour to do its best for this coming year, and there's a lot of suggestions for meeting topics in the pipeline already, and so hopefully it'll be another exciting year for you. And by the time we have our next general meeting, we would have had a committee meeting, and we'll let you know who the executive officers are for this coming year. Now, other business, perhaps I'll hand over to Dr. Lois Zweck, who will give us a bit of an overview of our meeting topic for next month. So you can stay there where you are.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, on April 23, so for next month's meeting, we hope to find you here to hear a very special story. It's taking us to a place and a time which we rarely visit in these meetings, to France, and to the story of Pastor Philip Jacob Oster and his trial in France, where he was active as a Lutheran pastor and a missionary to the Jews. He was tried for holding home services in his own home. So it's a very important question of religious freedom at that time in France. And you may recall that our forebears in Prussia were also accused of very similar offence of attending unauthorised home services, for which they were fined and perhaps jailed. So it's a similar story, it's a different story. The person who is featured in this story, Pastor Philip Jakob Oster, was the third Lutheran pastor to be called by a congregation to come to South Australia. So after Carvel and Fritscher, we have Pastor Oster. And he accepted the call of a Lutheran congregation in Prussia, which he had moved to from France in the meantime, and unfortunately died en route. But his family has become an enormous personal legacy here in South Australia. Many of you may know the story of the family through the memoirs of Anna I about early Lutheran congregations in South Australia. One member of that very prominent and very significant personal legacy of the Oster family in South Australia, generally, is Dr. Lisa Schmidt, who will be speaking to us about her forebear on that night, because she at our next meeting, after she has researched, of course, the history of her family back in its original France. You will know Lisa Schmidt as until recently, the Director of Lutheran Education Australia. Just one example of the significance of the Oster family in Lutheran education in Australia. So, a fascinating look at a different part of Europe, but one that is very relevant to our story. Can I also just very briefly say, today, the History Month, History Festival program has been launched both as a booklet and online, and that is, of course, the whole of May. All of the history organisations in South Australia put their best foot forward to show you something interesting about your story, and we, of course, will have a special meeting for Friends of Lutheran Archives. But tonight I would like to point out the event by German Heritage Research Group, a whole-day seminar on the 2nd of May with the topic Moving On, Mapping German Settlement in South Australia. As you know, Pastor Carvel's people and Pastor Fritscher's people settled Klemzig, the Barossa and the Hills, but Lutherans then spread, Germans generally, then spread right throughout the colony. And we will be telling you on that day some of the stories of why, how, where and when that extension of settlement happened. And you can pick up a flyer about it from me or from the treasurer's table if you are interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois. You're right there. Good. Now we move on to our topic for tonight, and you can read up there, presented by your favourite archivist. I haven't got my glasses on. Faithful archivist. So, look, I'll call on Ben to introduce what's happening here tonight.
I'm the favourite archivist. Just a couple of points. There is an apology from Jodie Brooke. She was going to attend tonight, and I'm not her favourite archivist, so she didn't come. No, she felt unwell this morning, and she's still feeling unwell, so we wish her a speedy recovery. Number two is Lutheran Archives, after a break of many years, is also presenting some events at the History Festival. We have some tours and some courses running again, and they are all available, so tell your friends, tell your family. Don't have to tell very many of them, there's only limited places, but tell them because we'd love to see them come and like to build this up again. All right, on to the important part. What do we say about Bethany? No, really, what do we say about Bethany? Bethany started with me. It was a good mix of the three of us coming together when we all started in 2022, 4 years now. I was devastated by the fact that she's 27 years younger than me. And she's still 27 years younger than me, and it's like she's holding that in my face. She's a very dedicated archivist and historian, and has been absolutely instrumental in bringing the stories out of the archive and presenting them both in FoLA and in other at other events, GHRG, and with other genealogy events. And once again, because I dobbed her in for this, I said, you know what, we should do something about the 100th anniversary of the archives. And she went, when's that? And I went, well, this year. She goes, is it? I'm going, well, yeah, is it? Well, it sort of is, we think. But from Bethany's talk tonight, hopefully we're actually going to find out when the archive started, because it's a bit confusing. Bethany?
Okay, how's my sound level? Can everyone hear me? We're good? Okay. So, why have we said that this year is 100 years of Lutheran Archives? Let me see if my clicker works. Oh, like that? No? Let's give it another go. Oh, hang on, we've gone, no? Oh, well, have you guys got a copy of my script up there? No, that's all right, never mind. I'll tell you when to move on if this thing doesn't start working. So, let's go ahead. I think it worked then. 1926 is the year we have highlighted as the official beginning of the church in Australia, the church archives in Australia. So why have I got 1922 Pastors' Conference up there? That is because, if we can advance to the next slide, our story begins with this jolly-looking fellow here, Pastor Oscar Bernhard Müller. He was a pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Synod in Australia, which I will hereafter refer to as ELSA until its name changes to ELCA in 1944. He served for 14 years as a home missionary in the Victorian Mallee region. He was described, I saw recently, as a small man with a large pipe and a large ability and heart. His father, if we can click to the next thing, his father was Oscar Müller Sr., a teacher, bookseller, and the founder of the printing firm in Hochkirch, now called Tarrington in Victoria, where ELSA printed their church periodicals and resources. In 1912, this printing firm was set to become the official base of operations for ELSA's brand new Lutheran Publishing Company. And Oscar Müller Jr., the pastor, was called in to come and manage it. He worked so hard over the next 6 years at this role that severe illness forced him to retire by 1918. But he still found ways to continue serving the church. One of those ways was apparently as church statistician. He was appointed to this role sometime between 1923 and 1926. And he became concerned not only with delivering correct figures for the president's report of how many pastors and how many congregations and how many communing members, but with the church's record keeping in general. Müller did not fill this role for very long, though. He died suddenly in January 1926, but he left behind a very important legacy for those of us who are interested in the archives. Because 3 months later, at the ELSA Synodical Convention in Tabor in 1926, we have our very first statistician, statistics, and archives report. I will quote from this report. Our system of statistics is antiquated and incomplete and in need of improvement. Together with this, a reorganisation of our church record system is necessary. The archives were put in order by Pastor O. Müller with painstaking care. Instead of being in the keeping of the Synod President for the time being, they should be permanently housed in Concordia College. A librarian should be appointed, and rules and regulations for their control should be adopted. In this way, they would become available to others and be of some real use. Elsewhere, we find that the late Pastor O. Müller has furnished the Executive Council with a draft of propositions and regulations for better control of the archives, as well as rules and regulations for the Office of Statistician. The Balaclava congregation moved that these regulations be adopted, and the Synod, in truly efficient and decisive style, resolved that the matter concerning the archives be referred to the Historical Committee. So who or what was this Historical Committee? Here they are. They were newly formed at the previous Synod in 1923. You can see the founding members up there on the screen. M.T. Winkler, professor at Concordia Seminary, Pastor J. Homan, pastor at St. Michael's, Harndorf, one of the most historic congregations, of course, of the Elsa Synod, and Alfred Brower, a former pastor of Harndorf, and then by this time pastor at St. John's in Melbourne. It was also decided when they formed this committee that the Synod President, the Synod Vice President, and the Synodical Secretary should be members of the Historical Committee. So you can get some sense of the fact that this was considered to be something important, something serious that the church leadership should be involved in, and they continued to sit on that committee right up until 1966 when ELSA finished. So that carried all the way through. The committee's primary remit was not archiving or records, but the conservation of places of historical value to Australian Lutherans. For ELSA, this meant the Pioneer Cemetery at Clemzig, the site of the first Lutheran settlement in South Australia, and also the old Lobethal College built in 1845, where their pioneer pastor, G.D. Fritcher, trained his first and only class of Lutheran pastors and teachers. It was also resolved in 1923 that Pastor A. Brower, who has already gathered material for this purpose, be requested to proceed with the writing of a church history, hence his presence on the committee. He was later officially given the role title of church historian. So the committee had a very successful first 3 years. According to their minute book, they met exactly once. A year later, after they were formed, on the 11th of November, 1924. However, we do get in these minutes their very first preliminary thoughts about some kind of archive. In point 2, called Historical Documents, etc., it was resolved that this committee, through the chairman, requests anybody that possesses any old documents and photographs regarding our church, or anything of interest or value once in the possession of the first Lutheran settlers, to kindly present them to the Synod, to send them to the chairman who would take charge of them, make a list of them, and finally that Synod be asked when it builds its gymnasium at Concordia College to allot a special room called the Historical Room, where these old documents and relics can be seen. And then, after this great advance, Professor Winkler promptly went on a very long holiday to America, and Pastor Homan came down with a very serious illness, so no further progress was made before the 1926 Synod. So when we come along to 1926, change it there, a slight change in personnel, if I can just click again. There we go. Pastor Zech subbed in for Pastor Homan there. Come 1926, Oscar Muller has looked at the archives, provided his list of recommendations, but then he sadly passed away before he was able to carry them out. And so the torch is passed to these fellows. Muller's recommendations, as you saw, were handballed to them, and the Synod left it up to them to decide what they wanted to do with them. As you can imagine, they got straight down to work. After another very productive 3 years, they came to Synod in 1929 with the new and original proposal that the archives of Synod be removed to Concordia College, as Muller had suggested. If we can jump ahead to the next slide there. Is it working? Is Jackie going to fly in again? I didn't mean to do that, but he might. There he is. So they come there with this proposal. Synod's response is very helpful. They remind the Historical Committee that Synod already resolved this matter in the previous time, and by resolved they mean that the matter concerning the archives was referred to the Historical Committee. So not a lot of help there. There's also been some progress on the question of appointing an archivist. They've presented the daring proposal that the archivist be appointed by the Historical Committee, which is received favourably. So all that remains now is for them to find somebody to appoint as archivist, which I'm sure cannot take them that long. Also in 1929, we have our first ever user review of the archives. We could jump along to the next slide here. There we go. It was none other, if we can click again, than Pastor Alfred Brower, who was trying to write his church history, of course, of the Elsa Synod at that time. Concerning his long working holiday in South Australia looking for records, he writes, "I intended to resume my research work in the archives of Synod at Adelaide, but I was informed that they were not yet available. These archives self-evidently contain most valuable and authentic historical material and should be made accessible. As soon as that is done, I hope to devote my next holiday to the same purpose and to resume and continue work in our synodical archives." So not a very favourable review. Essentially, they weren't open. And meanwhile, what has happened to the rules and regulations? Has the committee decided whether or not to adopt them? 3 years later, we do have an answer. In 1932, at long last, it was resolved that the archivist, together with the Historical Committee, observe the rules and regulations for the archives based on the draft made by the late Pastor O. Muller. And if you had any curiosity about what was actually in them, I'm going to very quickly give you a summary because it's interesting to compare what in 1926 they thought a church archive ought to be and how it ought to function. Point 1 is essentially location, and this was the suggestion to have it kept at Concordia College, which was the seminary. It was the sole secondary school and also the training school for pastors of the Synod, so a central church-owned location. Point 2 was essentially their first rough sketch of a collections policy. What should they actually collect and take? It turns out Oscar Muller was pretty much bang on target for what we still take today. Administrative records at synodical and district level, copies of all the church's publications and periodicals, photographs and albums to do with the church history, personal papers of pastors and prominent lay people who have been involved in the life of the church, and also some congregation material, although here's the one major difference. There's no call out at this stage for minute books or church registers. All it says in these regulations is to get the commemorative material, so the Jubilee books, the anniversary books, the dedication service orders, because those often have a history of the congregation written in the back, and that's what they were really after at this stage. Points 3 to 8 are essentially their collection management policies, so how incoming records should be stamped, entered in the archives register, files should be sorted, stored, and indexed to make them findable. And of course, an archivist should be appointed who will make decisions about the retention and disposal of these donated records. And points 9 to 10 are the very first access policy. The archives should be available to all members of Synod, but they must apply to access the material and state what they plan to do with it. The archivist then makes a decision as to whether or not they let them have access to this material. And the reason they're a bit picky about it is because they don't have a research room or a reading room anywhere, so it gets loaned out. The person takes it away and has to sign their life away that they will definitely protect it and take good care of it and that they will bring it back at their own expense when they're finished with it. What?
Sorry, I'm just going to be a bit grumpy here. We've gone 6 years. You keep talking about an archivist.
Yeah.
Where's the archivist?
Well, they're on the case, okay? They're working on it.
Okay. So no archivist. So an archive rules, no archivist. Can I just, oh sorry, I wasn't going to do this. I told Jeff I'd only do this if she got something wrong.
I was going to, I could hand you this, but it's not going to,
Isn't it?
It's not working.
Maybe it's I've got the special touch.
Doesn't look like it.
Maybe it's all the heads in the way. It's Tanya, that's the problem. Can you just flick to the next slide? Sorry, I also changed your slide. There was another church happening at the time, and that was UELCA. We're in a UELCA building, so it's only proper that we should talk about the UELCA archives. Now, to be fair, we did start slightly later. So it was 1927 when they made a decision. It was only a year later, and they went the other way. They actually came out with this thing, and they said an archive should be set up, and the secretary of the church will be put in charge of it. And that motion was put up, and when it was actually put up, the secretary of the church had made a slight amendment and said, no, there will be somebody else in charge of it, thank you very much. And the person they got in was actually Wolfgang Riedel, who was a Bavarian-born pastor and had come out here, and was also, at that time, a lecturer at the seminary, in very much the same way as Elsa. He was also the librarian at the seminary, so he got the Guernsey, and he got straight into it, absolutely straight into it, very much like the Elsa people did. And in 1929, he said, sorry, I've been a bit busy, but I'm getting into it now. So he put out and he said, can you please send in all of your material, make sure that you send it in to me, make sure you don't throw things out, and we'll collect it and put it together. I'm sure I've got another piece of paper. I was on the floor. See, this is the thing, I got so excited. I need the proper piece of paper. So that was a general convention. So yeah, he came out and he said, look, it's been resolved. And this was his actual things. Pressing work has hitherto prevented me from attending to these duties, better late than never. 1931, he actually really got in starting the work of those documents. And the ELCA, he put out an appeal in 1929, and he basically got told by the majority of the congregations, unless you have a fireproof safe, we are not giving you our records. And he went, oh, that's a bit sad. So, but he kept on putting out those calls to it. By 1929, they had 243 objects in their archive. And we actually, unlike another synod that I won't talk about, we actually have their accession register, their original accession register. So we've got some of those first ones. And some of those things are things like Carvel's Apostolic Constitution. We've got the copy of that. That was one of the first things to come in. And the 1846 synodical minutes, which are fairly interesting for those of you that know about our church history. So we did have some quite interesting ones coming in, all beautifully handwritten in German. And so that was lovely. But there was this issue that unless a fireproof safe was going to get made, wasn't going to happen. Riedel got right onto that though, and the synod, and this was something that's very important and we'd love to see again today, is that the synod agreed to meet all of the needs of the archive, including all of the expenses of the archives, and they would just write them off as administrative expenses. Feel free to go back, we'll do that same thing now, just put it in the administrative pile, we're absolutely happy with that. Brother Sazanovsky offered to purchase a fireproof safe. And at the same time, Pastor Thiele noted that there was a theological library of the late Pastor Krause was reputedly in the possession of the Melbourne congregation, which at that stage was actually still part of an Australian synod. They hadn't yet gone across to join a German synod. And it was moved that the person in charge, Pastor Riedel, who was not the archivist, we don't go for boring names, he's the keeper of the archives. He was to go and make some things about it. And he got on it. He did actually get on it now. After that first year, he did really get onto things. 1934 synod, they had a fireproof safe. They started to have everything rushing in because the congregations couldn't actually complain about the fact that there was no fireproof safe anymore.
Well, so we're up to 1934 now.
We are.
Yeah. So I've got news to report. We've nearly got an archivist. Can I move on? Yeah, here we go. Here's Fred Blaise. Let me tell you what's going on here. So ELCA have made some official progress. They've ruled at the 1935 Synod that the archivist should be a member of the Historical Committee. And they are now...
Which member? Which member should it be?
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. So they're starting to home in on their man now. In 1934, the Historical Committee had approached one Pastor F.J.H. Blaise, who you see up on screen there. He was then the parish pastor at Harndorf, and they asked him to begin writing historical segments for the Australian Lutheran, Elsa's church newspaper. In March 1934, the very first of these appeared under the title, I Remember the Days of Old. It came with an appeal for pastors, congregations, and individual members to supply the archives, in inverted commas for some reason, with letters, documents, pictures, photos, records, or any other matter which is of historical interest to our Lutheran Church. People are instructed to send this matter to Pastor Blaise at Harndorf, who will use them in writing his historical columns, and then file them away in the archives. So, I mean, like, he's basically the archivist.
That's a qualification. You have qualified that we basically have an archivist.
He's basically, I mean, okay, so it's a technicality if we jump along here. I did find this letter where he is forced to explain to somebody that rumours of his appointment as archivist have been greatly exaggerated. He writes, I happen to have no official connection with the Historical Committee, beyond having been asked by them to write those Remember the Days of Old column for the Lutheran. I am not even the appointed archivist. No appointment has been made, except that the Historical Committee asked Prof. Winkler to take charge. And since I was looking at some historical documents a few years ago, I offered to go back through the archives, there again in inverted commas, and sort and file the matter on hand. So, I mean, look, he's doing the job of the archivist.
Yeah, but he's not an archivist, is he?
Look, how's your archivist going anyway?
Oh, my archivist's going well. Riedel quit in 1934. He didn't die. It's one step up from Mueller. But yeah, he did quit. And we got a new one straight away. And he wasn't an archivist. He's keeper of the archives. And we have a new one of those. We now have Johannes Edwin Ulricht. And Ulrichs know a lot about paper. You know, they unfortunately know a lot about having their paper stores burned down as well, which is a little concerning. But luckily we've got a fireproof safe now. So it's quite good. What else did we do? So we got up to 1937. 1937, we've got our fireproof safe in there. And we've got a small room in the seminary. So we've got an archivist, an archive, and a place to put them. That's pretty much it.
Is it my turn again now?
It is your turn again. I mean, what else do I need?
Well, I've got breaking news. It's 1938, and finally, 12 years after Oscar Muller gave his regulations, ELCA has an official appointed archivist. We can jump ahead here. We also have our first ever archivist's report. Quote, historical documents, letters, etc. are in the hands of Pastor Blaise, who has ordered and filed the majority and given us the interesting and valuable notes in the Australian Lutheran, that's his columns. In terms of its current location, all the printed matter, the periodicals, synodical reports, almanacs, etc. are kept at the college. Our great difficulty is in the lack of a special room. So according to the Historical Committee minutes book, Blaise attends his first meeting as archivist in 1939, and his first officially recorded act as archivist is that he is authorised to purchase a filing cabinet. But as we move now into the 1940s, the archives becomes gradually more settled and established. By 1941, Blaise has diligently continued the tedious but very useful work of ordering and filing the historical documents, letters, accounts, etc. For that purpose, our committee has provided a filing cabinet and foolscap folders. By 1944, the synodical archives are now housed at the college in a separate room, with £10 furnished by the Executive Council of Synod to put up shelving, while the committee has supplied a table and several chairs. Over 400 files have been arranged and indexed, and Blaise warns the Church in his Synod report that before long, another filing cabinet will be needed, since a considerable amount of material has come in and more is expected. He also desires to remind pastors and lay members to not only send him books, but also Jubilee programs, records, and documents of local congregations. This sounds very similar to the sorts of things we're reminding people to do today. But of course, 1940s, there's a lot going on in the world at the moment, so you may be wondering, how did wartime affect Lutheran archivists? For Elke, it was not too bad. The primary impact was that they couldn't print Pastor Alfred Brouwer's history in the years around the end of the war, his monumental church history, because of paper rationing. And as the initial manuscript was 600,000 words long, that's quite understandable. But we do also find this interesting little note in the 1944 Synod report. We would like to impress upon pastors and congregations the necessity of sending in names of all members on service, particularly for two reasons. Now, the first of those reasons is for ongoing ministry in pastoral care and sending them correspondence and so on. But the second reason is that a complete record of all service personnel may be deposited in the archives of Synod after the war. This is a common theme I noticed throughout looking at Elke's records of archives, is that they're very aware that history is being created as it happens. There's quite a few reminders in there exhorting people to keep good records and to deposit them specifically in order to preserve that historical memory. So their emphasis isn't necessarily a legal or practical one, but it's that historical one and that more memory-focused emphasis, which I thought was interesting. Anyway, how's the war going for you?
Oh, it was going great. If you can just flick across to the... We were lucky that we had Ulrich and J.E. Matern as an assistant. He came on as an assistant in 1934 as well. Now, for those of you who know the history of Emmanuel Seminary and College, during the war, things were a little hectic. And the archives was raided a couple of times, and there was some concern about whether things had been removed. We're not still sure about whether there were items removed from the archive. We really should go back and do a good audit against our accession register that luckily we've got. We could do that. Sorry? Yeah, well, yes. I don't want to sling mud at anybody in particular, but, you know, stuff. So Ulrich was a little busy, and so Matern sort of like was required to actually kick in there and do some stuff. And then Matern had a slight issue during the war. I don't know whether you remember that he got interned, which did make it difficult to be the archivist. And we could have called on Riedel as the previous archivist, but he'd been interned.
In fact, 10% of your pastorate was interned.
Well, yes, okay. And it was getting difficult finding any pastor that was available to end up as an archivist because most of them were getting interned at this point of time or getting raided. So it was a bit tricky. Luckily, we had females. And so Pastor Matern's wife actually ran the archive for about 4 years, doing all the collecting and the cataloguing. And isn't actually recognised terribly much in that. But we thank her. That is her. That is Pastor Matern and his wife on their wedding day. And the first female archivist. And we now have a long tradition of female archivists, which I'm desperately trying to break. Yeah, so that was good. We actually got through. 1944 was actually a very good year for us. J.J. Stoltz decided that we actually needed a board. So up until this point of time, the archive was completely under the control of the Keeper of the Archives. You've got to say it in the right voice. And Stoltz decided that maybe there needed to be a little bit more control, a bit more synodical oversight, and so he put together a board. And the board that he put together was... It was Matern and Ulrich, after they got uninterned and got a little bit less busy. And if you can just flick to the next one. So we've got Matern and Ulrich there, and just hit it again. Pushing into the middle of them is somebody that probably none of you really recognise. He's not a terribly well-known figure within Lutheran history, or historical Lutheran. That's Henry Provey. So Henry Provey came on in 1944 as a member of the board, and by 1947 he'd become not the keeper of the archives, he became the custodian of the archives. We don't go for boring names. So 1947 was really when it actually kicked off again after the war. They said thank you to everybody. There was about an 8-year report. It was a bit like after the First World War, where they sort of did this back report over everything and said things were bad. They did say thank you to Mrs. Matern, which was very lovely. And we got this board going. So Stoltz had gotten them together. Nothing of a permanent nature could be undertaken until Emmanuel North Adelaide was returned to the church after the war. That made life a little difficult. The archive was actually stored just on the stage next door here, in the Emmanuel Church Hall. Well, no, wouldn't have been there, would it? No, it would have been in the old church hall, down in Tint Street. So it was the old church hall. Probably kept as well. I got told by somebody that they're a little concerned that they've got a triptych by Dowie, the artist, sculptor, is actually currently being stored in the church hall here, and they'd like to maybe do something with that which is less problematic. So storing stuff in the Emmanuel Church Hall is not an unknown thing for archives. Anyway, it also came out in the minutes of the Archives Committee that it is to be deplored that so many congregational records had been destroyed through ignorance or lack of interest. ULCA had a real problem that people were actively destroying records, and there was anecdotal evidence of archivists and collectors going and saying, do you have these records? And people saying, oh, you should have been here last week, we just threw them all in the fire. So this is why a lot of archivists end up dying. It was agreed that if a district had an archivist, it was agreed, that's not 2 words, that's very bad. It was agreed that each district should also have an archivist. And that those archivists should work with the central archives to make sure that things are collected. And that was a scheme that obviously went in really well, and we're still seeing the effects of that today. How many districts have got archivists? Yeah, none. So what's that, 80 years later? Yeah, that one never really got worked on. That should have happened. And those archives and records would always be available to congregations to use. But such occasions are probably few and far between that they use them. In 1945, we changed our name. We actually decided to become Archives and Historical Records. And in 1946, it was shown that we now had an archives room at 196 Ward Street. And in 1947, we finally got a new and permanent room in the old seminary building. And you said that you got a filing cabinet?
In 1947, we also got a new and permanent room, as a matter of fact.
And what did you get in your new and permanent room?
We got it in 1947 as well. So the committee said in 1947, they are now satisfied that proper provision has been made for housing. Their required files and shelves have been installed in a room made available at Concordia College. And interestingly, they've also begun revising those rules and regulations that Oscar Muller drafted for them, and that they adopted back in the 1930s. And their updated version is adopted then in 1950.
Ah, we had a rubber stamp.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it was noted in synodical minutes that a table, a few chairs, a rubber stamp, keys for the doors, and some minor office equipment had been procured. And we also had rules and regulations. So in 1947, we finally had rules and regulations. This means that stuff's actually happening. We're pretty much on track now. It's like we're talking to each other occasionally, or at least reading each other's newsletters. In 1947 was also when Haybart decided that he needed to donate his personal collection of very valuable historical documents, which were purportedly stored under his bed, that he'd used for writing his Uelka history book. So he made a big deal of actually passing them in as well. That was my 1940s and the war. It was great.
All right, well, let's bring things up to date. I wonder how far behind the
Oh yeah, we got, sorry, there you go.
There we go. I've been turning it off so I don't get feedback when he's talking, so. Otherwise, the microphones will, you know, they might shriek. So, by the 1950s and 60s that we're getting into now, things are getting further along and more established. There's been a bit of a changing of the guard regarding the historical committee by this point compared to the originals. We learned that in the early 1950s, Professor Zech has retired due to, quote, old age and failing memory. Members are now Professor Altus, one of the other seminary professors, Pastor P.G. Strelin, Pastor Albert Zweck, and of course Fred Blaise, who is now both archivist and the official church historian. And then in the late 1950s, Prof. Altus is replaced by Pastor Elmore Lesky. If I can, yeah, there we go. And 2 laymen joined the committee for the first time as well. You can see their names up there. Work in the archives over this period, the 1950s, has consisted mainly of filing away the materials sent in. And Blaise now gives us a bit of a catalogue of some of the recent donations in this period. He mentions certain valuable documents from John Darso, without being much more specific than that. Numerous letters and publications from the late Dr. C.F. Graebner, the Concordia Principal. A translation by Mr. Schoeknecht of the Dictionary and Grammar of the Language of the Diri People, written in January 1873. And one of our greatest Lutheran Archives showstoppers came in during this period as well, if we jump to the next slide here. Many of you may be familiar with this, a copy of the Union Agenda or Church Liturgy of 1822. This is the King's Liturgy, King Friedrich Wilhelm III's liturgy for his Prussian State Church. This was donated by Pastor Max Pachor in 1951 to the archives. He'd brought a copy from Germany when he came over after the war. He'd rescued a copy in Germany after the war and brought it over with him and donated it to the archives when he realized that it had significance here to our story. Many of the congregations and also the church departments are now regularly supplying the archives with their publications month by month, sending them in. By 1956, there's also a new project underway. They begin cooperating with the Lobethal congregation to convert the old Lobethal College into a museum. And FoLA has previously had a talk from the person currently organising that museum, Andrew Zilm. So that's the same. That's where that story started and intersected here. So what's Uelka up to in the 1950s, Ben?
Oh, the 1950s were a rocking and raging time. We'd had a bit of a revolving door of board members. Not that revolving door.
Sorry, let me get rid of those.
Oh, this revolving door. So Haybart had come in. So at the moment, we've got the board is being Theodore Haybart, Henry Provey, and Jay Matern. And we then picked up Walter Roers, who is really acknowledged in the archives as one of the pastors that functionally refused to have his photo taken. So that's him bending over signing a visitor's book with his back to the camera. But, you know, there's a nice bit of stained glass there. Anyway, he came in and that was in 53. He joined. So they'd actually expanded to 4. And again, Apparently Haybart didn't particularly like him. No, I don't know whether that's true, but by 1956 Haybart had left, and then in 1959 Rurs was called to Canberra, and so we welcomed back Riedel, because, you know, we've almost gone back to the original sets of archivists by this stage. A couple of interesting things did happen in 1950. There was a motion put forward in 1950 that the board should be completely dissolved and that the custodian be left in complete control. The Synod was not terribly keen about this as an idea because they'd seen what had previously happened. So they did that. There was a sessional committee then that resolved that the archives and finance boards did need to work out what they were going to do about fireproof room. The fireproof cabinet was now too small. We now needed a fireproof room. One of the ideas that was put up was that it could be housed in the underground room at the resident of the president. I believe that. The resident of the president. Because that would be fireproofed. The archives board went, no. Like, number one, we don't have a key. We'd have to be coming in and out of your house the whole time to get to the archives. And we don't think that it's actually particularly fireproof if your house burns down on top of it.
So why is it that they keep going on about things being fireproof?
I don't know, we have precedent about that. So this is J.J. Stoltz's office. We have a series of burned documents in the archive that came out of J.J. Stoltz's office. So putting them in the president's house probably wasn't something that we were going to go for terribly much. We're still dealing with the after effects of the last time that somebody left their pipe on top of a pile of papers.
Well, we're now moving into the 60s. In 1962, Elka were very pleased to be able to report that the Lobethal College Museum had opened and the college was now safely preserved. They could tick that item off of their agenda where it had been since the 1920s. They were also beginning to think of a new home for the archives. They were also beginning to outgrow their previous room. Part of the reason for this was that the position of the seminary was starting to become a bit uncertain as we were looking forward to union as well. Shortly thereafter in, 1962, 2 rooms in the Atkinson House at 51 Cheltenham Street were provided in early 1963. The transfer of material from the room at the college was effected with the help of seminary students and several other voluntary helpers. And I have been reliably informed this week in a dramatic twist of fate that a future archivist was living at that time in the very same building where the archives had just moved into. So the front 2 rooms of that house were used as housing for the archives. The back 2 rooms were accommodations for boarding students at Concordia. And in 1964, one of those boarders was none other than Lyle Kupke. So perhaps he caught the archiving bug there. And perhaps it was inhaled through the fumes of Fred Blase's pipe smoke, which I am reliably informed regularly filled the entire building, which is excellent archival practice, I am sure.
It keeps the bugs down.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. But satisfaction with this arrangement was short-lived. By 1965, the question of the location of the seminary and proper library accommodation is once again up in the air because of approaching union with UELCA and what's going to happen to these 2 seminaries, what's going to happen to their libraries, and of course what's going to happen to their archives. Staffing is also an issue. The 5 hours per week of clerical help, which they've been granted, that's been paid for, been much appreciated, but does not go very far for a task that asks for full-time work. And so at the 1965 Synod, a huge proposal for the archives is put up for Synod to vote on. Church archives establish with full-time archivist, whereas the present arrangement of church archives and part-time archivist is far from satisfactory. Be it resolved that in order to preserve items of historical interest and importance to the church, this convention take a firm decision to establish a church archives as a proper basis by the appointment of a full-time archivist with adequate facilities, and that the present archivist, Dr. Blase, be released from seminary teaching duties and appointed as full-time archivist. They want to take over the whole of that building, Atkinson House, for their church archives. They want a full-time secretary and typist to be appointed to assist the archivist. And they want what Uelka had from the beginning, that the church allocates through the seminary budget annually all the necessary finance for salaries, allowances, office expenses. They've got here as well an amount to be determined annually for research work and expenditure on items of historical interest, buying typewriters, duplicators, copying machines, and so on. They also think that the administration of the archives and all of these resolutions should be controlled by Concordia Seminary. That should be who's in charge of the archives. In true decisive fashion, of course, the Synod's resolution to this proposal was to handball it to somebody else. They palmed it off on the Executive Council and the Seminary Council for consideration and action if necessary. Ben, do you have anything to report as we approach union?
Well, we continued with our bit of a revolving door, but 1962, Matern actually had been voted in again, and almost immediately after Synod and his election, he went to Wangaratta and he thought it was a bit far to commute. So Clement Schmidt was asked to step in. It probably wasn't the best year to step in at this point of time, because the same year Henry Provey stepped away from being the custodian of the archives. Sorry, almost lost that. In order to become a full-time church historian. So Clement Schmidt, as well as coming on new to the board, was made the custodian and the secretary. And it would have been the president as well if he was allowed to take that role as well. I'm pretty sure that everybody was just shoving everything onto him. So in 1962 he did that, but Henry came back in 1964 and continued. I'm just going to stand a little bit further away from you. Sorry. It's not that I don't like you. Yeah, that's
but we're
right.
echoing. Yeah.
We are. The board had also expanded to 5 now, and you'll notice up in the top left-hand corner there that Helga Zinbauer had actually joined the board. So we've got our first female board member and first lay member. So now we've got don't do that. So you've got Zinbauer, Clemens, Riedel. No. Jericho down the bottom there, and Henry. Okay, 1965, we get Matern back, because he decides that he's going to come back again. Schmidt went, Matern came back, and 1966, at the age of 85, Riedel decided that maybe it was time to finally retire, and so he jumped off the board. And apparently it was all too much for him, because 5 years later he died. I'm not saying that working for the archives kills you, but yeah. He didn't die in office, that was good. In 1962, there was a few important pushes that happened, including that the Synod asked the archives if possibly now they could make a concerted push, their words, a concerted push to do some collection of documents. I'm not sure what they had been doing for the previous 40 years other than a concerted push, but they decided they'd do a concerted push for material. And could somebody also find out whether the collection was actually insured adequately? The collection also moved into the new and shiny seminary library, which was lovely, and they were very impressed by this. They had their new library. The 1965 Synod came back and answered a couple of those questions. The first one was that the appeal to do that concerted push now required them to go out to congregations and ask them, please do not actively destroy your records when you stop reading them. This was still happening. In the 1960s, there was still congregations actively destroying records. And it makes so much sense now of when people ring up and, have you got this register? No, we don't. Actually, we don't have anything from that congregation at all. Wonder where that could be. And as long as it's not the Udunda Robertstown Parish, because we know where all of those ones are, yeah, the other ones, it's probably that they were just thrown into a large bonfire, which does make my heart weep a little bit. The other one, in terms of the insurance, the church worked out that if they actually fully insured the collection, the church would go broke. They said, we cannot insure it. We cannot adequately insure your collection. Because 2 reasons. One is the valuable items which would be replaceable, it just makes our premiums way too high, and two, the ones that are irreplaceable are irreplaceable. You need to do something to make sure that, and we keep going, fireproof safe, fireproof safe, fireproof safe. That was pretty much it though. The 1960s, it was a time of love and peace.
Very good. Speaking of love and peace, here we are at the fellowship between ELCA and UELCA. They proclaimed altar and pulpit fellowship in late 1965. Both synods then held their closing conventions in 66 and constituted as a single new church, the Lutheran Church of Australia, later in 1966. Obviously, one of the many items on the agenda was what was going to happen to these two separate church archives. But fortunately, history is one area in which the two synods had been cooperating for a long time. They had already been brought together by their mutual love for this dusty patch of ground here. This is the site of the Pioneer Cemetery at Klemzig, where the first Lutheran migrants settled in 1838. In a strange twist of fate, ELCA ended up owning the trust to this piece of land. The church body itself, the synod, owned the trust to this land. It was explained by Blaise after the Klemzig congregation ceased in 1878, the manse and church were dismantled and only the cemetery remained. Mr. C. Loymeyer, a trustee of St. Stephen's, then an independent congregation, pleaded with the government not to close it down. Unable to get sufficient support from his congregation, he approached ELCA, who bought the lease and took over responsibility for caring for it in August 1924. Of course, ELCA had an equal or arguably a greater historical interest in Klemzig, and so they soon approached ELCA to see what they were up to and see if they could lend their support. In 1930, the two churches signed an agreement to take on dual responsibility for keeping up this historical site and turning it into a historical memorial. They made plans to have these joint centenary celebrations in 1838 and put up an obelisk to mark the 100 years since the Lutherans came to Australia. And there was eventually also an independent trust with members from both the two different synods set up, and the land title was, the lease was moved across into that independent trust. Then throughout the 1950s, you had, I found this quite funny in the ELCA Synod report, Albert Zweck, the nearby pastor in Hectorville, was keeping a watchful eye on this historic spot. Various working bees organised over the years to put up fences and weeding, but it always got run down in between. People were always disappointed by the state that it was in. So in 1965, the Klemzig Cemetery Trust came up with a solution. They were going to erect a building on the cemetery ground, which was to provide a museum for the of Klemzig documents and artefacts, and the cottage would also serve as cottage accommodation for a caretaker who in return will take care of the cemetery and serve there as its curator. So there was going to be this little museum archive with a live-in curator pottering around doing the weeding for them. Sadly, this very charming little idea never actually happened. But it did persist for several years in early LCA synod reports as a going concern before it was scrapped. But if the archives were ending up in a cottage in Klemzig, then where were they going? And who was going to be in charge? So there was a joint meeting of the the ELCA Historical Committee and the UELCA Board on 8 July 1966. The two committees resolved to come together and function as one board. They made Blaise, the ELCA Archivist, the chairman, and Pastor Provey, the UELCA Archivist, the secretary. A subcommittee was then convened by Pastor E. Wiebusch, who you can see in the middle there, who compared the two rules and regulations and basically merged them together to sort of put together rules and a constitution and that sort of thing to combine it. So I guess at this point, Ben, I'm going to need to stop arguing.
That's sad. Did I win?
I think we'll have to call it a draw.
Okay.
I'll conclude this little part, our sort of two synods part of the presentation, with a quote from ELCA's very last archives report at their closing convention that I thought was quite nice. They noted, "What happens today soon becomes history. and if the records of the present momentous happenings in Australian Lutheran churches are to be available for the future, immediate provision should be made that no documents, records, etc. are lost. Archives and historic records are the memory of the church. And so, here was amalgamation, the Constituting Convention, the Board of Archives and Research was established at the Constituting Convention with members from both of the former synods. It adopted its constitution and its rules and regulations, and they purchased the site for temporary storage as the Uelka archives were being kicked out of the seminary and Elka's days at Concordia were also numbered, so they needed somewhere new. They purchased this spot here at 5 Wellington Square, which was later renumbered to 17. Ben and I worked after spending a while on Google Maps trying to make everything make sense. Just around the corner from the seminary campus, which was soon to become the combined Luther Seminary. They transferred the two separate collections together into this joint location by December 1967, so it took them about a year. As it was only temporary, they didn't do any renovations. So this was just a house. They didn't do anything to change the structure of rooms or anything like that, do any repairs. So it must have been a rather quirky setup. Archive. It probably wasn't fireproof, that's true. By early 1968, they'd finished their unpacking and preliminary sorting. And also acknowledged their gratitude to the women's guilds of the church, whose personal help and donations of curtains, carpets, etc. have made the premises quite presentable. And even in this very early and temporary state, the board were pleased to report that much use has been made of the archives by congregations, members, and individuals and bodies not connected with the church. Not a few have been referred by the SA State Archives and the universities. Some are overseas researchers. In fact, the 1970 Synod report records 194 calls made on the archives between June 1968 and August 1969. That would have been Henry Provey taking care of things at that point, noting that down. Many, of course, were made by people starting work on their family histories and also congregation histories, but there were also these international ones as well. So what about the first archivist? Who got the honour? Did they have to duel for it, or what happened? They essentially both got a turn. Blaise was appointed the first full-time archivist in 1967 and undertakes the mammoth task of integrating the two archives into one. When he dies in 1969, Henry Provey took over.
So that's 3 archivists now that we've killed, isn't it?
Yes. Yep. Henry Provey takes over, but he's already the secretary of the LTA, and so they realise they need to make a different arrangement there. They also note that it's undesirable to ask an active pastor in ministry to be doing the archive job, so they decide to approach a retired pastor and offer an honorarium. And they get their man in May 1971, Pastor JTP Jack Stoltz. Recently retired from Melbourne, he moves over to become archivist, and his wife, Anne-Marie, the sister of Max Lowe, becomes his assistant. She's recorded as the assistant archivist. We also hear some reports of the founding volunteers. Volunteering went back as something even right back to this stage. Some of the ones mentioned were Mr. Fred Jacob, Mrs. F. Dola, Mrs. June Jenke, Miss Weckett, and a Mrs. Janetsky.
And the very important one, actually, in one of the very early notices, there's a note there saying that Mr. John Pfeiffer is now living at the archives, so there is always somebody there overnight, which was, I feel, taking security fairly seriously. So obviously he had that and possibly a fire blanket. Yeah,
we can only hope. Aside from the benefits of live-in security, however, having the archives in a house was not ideal for preservation needs. And soon enough, that prime land near the seminary was wanted for other purposes because Lutheran Teachers College was coming to North Adelaide, and that old house was going to be knocked down to build Catherine Court as accommodations for all the young Lutheran women that were flocking into North Adelaide through the 1970s and 80s to become teachers. So the archives, after their 5 years in temporary storage on Wellington Square, they're shuffled off into even more temporary storage in 1974 in this old gymnasium building, which is described as of humble and shed-like appearance. It is neither dust nor mice and rat-proof, presumably also not fireproof. As 3 of its walls are galvanized iron, it is subject to the fluctuations of heat and cold. Facilities for staff leave much to be desired. But there are plans afoot for the church's very first purpose-built archives building. And for those plans, I'll now hand over to Ben.
Okay, so in the 1970s, some of you may remember the huge appeal that was put out to build LTC, and as part of that, there was also to build the archives, and there was an original plan was put up, and this was the original floor plan, and we spent time looking at this. We love looking at plans of archives because it's really exciting to see whether they were doing well, and we were looking at this and going, well, this is all right, this looks all right, and we noticed a small bit of interest. Can you just hit your clicker again? See that red circle? The little black square inside of that's a toilet cubicle. So just look at the size. That's a normal toilet cubicle. The next red circle is the tea room. You will notice that the tea room is the size of the toilet cubicle. And those volunteers, you reckon that we're squishy in ours today? Pretty sure that would have been a lot worse. There's literally nowhere to eat in it. There is a place that you can walk in, make a cup of tea, and then stand back out. I presume just stand in the hallway in the display area and chat. Or it's the fact that you, as a volunteer or staff, you weren't actually meant to stop working, which is probably a really good idea. Anyway, that was put up. This was actually kiboshed. I think the next slide. They were going to build it in where the car park was behind the old church house, like the old church-wide office, behind the library and sort of in that car park area there. That's where they were thinking of building it. And if you just want to show that, this is the thing here. Can I just, I'm going to use the laser. Oh, that's there. So it doesn't show up. Up the top, it says Gymnasium Temporary Archives. So that's sort of where we were, just on Ward Street. If you can sort of picture where things are. And where we were going to move is over there. And it looks like a nice bit of open blank space. And what's been put up is that, well, it's land that was already owned. So it'll be a really good place to put the archives. But there were some people that were concerned, and that would have been the married seminarians, because that's where their houses were. So they were going to knock down the accommodation for married seminarians and put the archives up on top of that, and they were a little concerned. One very helpful responder to their concern said, well, maybe we can build the archives and build units on top of it. So we were going to end up with this multi-storey thing. Eventually that was completely kiboshed, particularly by the Adelaide City Council. They didn't like that as a really good idea. And we went down the road to where Church House is, and we ended up in the pub car park. So there was also not a lot of love lost in terms of the money. You'll notice that there's an appeal here for $350,000. This is 1974. $350,000 is a fair whack. And that was for the LTC and the archives. Most of that was LTC. There's somebody that actually wrote into the archives and said, why are we spending money on dusty documents? Why are we spending $60,000 on dusty documents? Luckily, he'd misread something, because he only thought it was going to be $60,000. There should be more money spent on missions and appeals, etc. And it was then became part of the marketing of this. Is in quotes, it would come out. Roger Toysner would come out and go, some members of congregations might say, why are we wasting money on dusty documents instead of spending money on missions and congregations and schools? But it's important, and the concept of memory, that if you do not have memory, then you cannot go forward. You don't know where you've come from, therefore you cannot move forward. And this was the underlying thing. It was actually $100,000 that was going to cost to build the archives, not $60,000. $60,000 just became peanuts by that stage. LTC also went up $75,000, so it didn't end up being $350,000 they needed for the appeal. It was well over $400,000 by the end of it. But eventually, we built a new building. We decided that we were going to get one in Archer Street, and Gropey, Schlenk and Henry all were there, ready to start building it in 1977. And it looked pretty. Well, it didn't really.
Not yet.
But we did get people, important people there. Senator Condor Lauke, Eric von Schramek. Was he the designer?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It didn't look like this.
And so then once they completed this building, of course they were facing the task of moving all the records into the new building. Jack Stoltz took one look at that and he retired due to ill health in April 1977. And you know who they called in
That was
for this
4.5.
job? Yes.
Can we call that 4.5? Okay.
We can call that 4.5. So you know who they called in? They got the one and only Max Big Al Lowe, who wins the prize for the LCA archivist who looks most like a mafia don, in my opinion. And also the prize for the LCA archivist, of whom there are the most existing political cartoons. These are Ilmar Ainsar's work, a fellow former Uelka pastor, who used to be a political cartoonist in Paris. So Max Lowe was appointed archivist in 1977, and he set about the mammoth task, it's always a mammoth task, of transferring the material into the new building.
What happened to Max Lowe?
Well, so he did not, in fact, get to be the first archivist in the new building because he died the week before the new building was opened. So
it's 5.5.
I think we can say that's fine. It definitely could have been a contributing factor.
5.5 in 50 years. We're doing well.
But nevertheless, thanks to Max Lowe's work, moving all of this across and getting it organised, Archives and Research Centre it was called, opened on 24 July 1977 with this beautiful weather. And so this project, first discussed in 1966, came into fruition. The church now has the satisfaction of knowing that its records are being suitably stored for future generations. The temperature is controlled in the storage area. In addition, the fire detection system is connected to the local fire brigade located nearby. So everyone from Uelka can let go a collective sigh of relief.
It was in the same street.
Yeah.
It was like literally across the road. They built the archives across the road from the fire station.
Yeah. And so with new archive comes new archivist, Pastor Philip Shearer, looking extremely trendy there.
Just come straight down from the desert there in his safari suit?
No, not actually. He's come from Clare Blythe Parish.
Well, that's in the desert as well.
Which is where my family came from. He would have been my mum's pastor when he was up there.
Interesting, isn't it? The Shearers came from Canberra. They were very involved in Canberra, weren't they?
That's where my dad's family came from.
Yeah, that's where your dad's Canberra from, and that's where I went to school. I feel that Canberra, with its entire population of 95 people, has actually produced more people working at the archive than any other place in Australia.
Well, and that's not all, because I can also point out that Fred Blace, when he was the archivist, used to live at 46 Cheltenham Street, which is where I grew up as a child. That Lyle Kupke was a school teacher at St Paul's Walla Walla. At the same time, my mum was the lab tech and my dad was the school chaplain there. And that our longest-serving archives volunteer, Lois Weck, is my great-aunt.
So what you're saying is the archives revolve around you?
What I'm saying is I think I was doomed to be the LCA. I don't think I could have escaped it at this point. But anyway, back to the 70s. We're going to give you a very quick tour just to see these wonderful photos that we didn't know existed until we started researching for this talk, of what the archives looked like in the 1970s and 80s. So what's that place? This is 101 Archer Street.
Which is where? Behind the pub.
Near the Archer Hotel.
Yeah. Where we had lunch a couple of years ago. Oh, you didn't come. corner Archer and O'Connell. That way.
Anyway, here we go.
I thought I was standing in the archive building at Archer Street. It's that way then. Anyway.
Here are some of the pictures. So if you'd been a researcher at that time, you may have had Fred Jacob come and help you in the room there. We had, of course, a large and dedicated volunteer team back then. Here are just some of these photos to enjoy quickly.
That's the fire system. It was checked daily.
They are vacuuming some books after fumigation. Polishing some chalices there. Miss L. Shearer, she sort of looks like she never gets let out by her expression there. We've got looking at the photographs, pasting up things for a catalogue, pasting up notes for a catalogue, typing the catalogue, and some venerable gentlemen looking at some old books there. And of course the archivist using the guillotine.
Yeah, absolutely. This is so good. We've got a guillotine, it said. We've got a guillotine given to us so that we can trim collection material.
Let's move on. If you're a researcher at this time, you may have been using the microfiche machine, which we actually booted up just this week for somebody to look at microfiche again. So there you go, it's still going. This is where a lot of research into mission was starting around this time as well. This researcher was in looking at PNG mission. The 1990s were, of course, a special time for us because we finally got some friends. This is when the Friends of Lutheran Archives started. And so I grabbed a few photos for you guys as well. Committee members outside the Restored
Who's that
Chapel.
holding a blue jacket? Is that Lois Beck?
We have here FoLA Victoria and FoLA Queensland going bush, looking for a commemorative plaque out in the bush somewhere. And a typical meeting back at that time, I imagine, with some guests from America.
I'm fairly sure I can see Lois Beck again. Come on, is she in there?
Well, we're getting into the 90s and 2000s here, so the faces are getting very familiar. Pastor Fred Kumaro was briefly the archivist. He didn't have a very long run. Here are some of the other faces you may have seen around that time. Looking very serious. Fred Kumaro left in December 1994. Here are some photos here from the farewell. You can see there the incoming archivist down in the bottom left corner, Lyle Kupke. With
Wearing a
his white
Hawaiian
gloves.
shirt. I'll just note that it has been a long-term archivist uniform to wear island shirts.
And Lyle was not only the first layman to become the head of the archives, also the first professionally trained archivist, which we'll talk about a little bit in a moment. Again,
who's that in the check shirt? Is that Lois Beck?
So here are some volunteers, some photos from the 90s. You will start to notice the furniture looking very familiar. That's still our reception desk. That is the same reception desk.
And the same front doors.
And the same front doors. People might recognise the tables in the research room.
The same research tables and the same research book room.
So this was
shelves.
still back at Archer Street, the old building in Archer Street. But we took a lot with us, evidently. You could even still find Lois hiding away in a corner of the vault, poring over some documents back then.
Aren't we glad that they made the lunchroom slightly bigger than the size of a toilet cubicle? And anybody that's a volunteer now, aren't you jealous that they got really comfy chairs?
So we were going to talk before. We mentioned before, Lyle was the first professionally trained archivist who actually went away, did the training, got an archives degree, and became the archivist. And we thought we should probably explore what that means, but since neither Ben nor I are actually professionally trained archivists, technically speaking, we would ask somebody who is. So Angie, what is a professional archivist? What do you do? Come up here and steal
What
Ben's...
should we be doing?
Come here and steal Ben's microphone.
I've been trying to tell them what they've been doing, should be doing for 4 years. No. So what does it mean to be, what is a professional archivist? You didn't give me that question earlier on today.
You answered the questions I gave.
Yeah. So a professional archivist, unbeknownst to quite a lot of people, to be an archivist, to be a professional archivist, you have to have a professional qualification, and you can do a 4-year undergrad, or you can do, I think you can do a certificate, you can do a diploma, and you can do a master's, or you can do a doctorate. So Lyle started the professional archivist, I guess, was the first professional archivist. Rachel was the second professional archivist, I think.
As far as I know.
Yeah. And then Jeanette and Adam came after.
And
Dana was a professional archivist.
She had a master's.
Yep. And then, that's it, isn't it? And then myself. I guess, what does it take for a archival institution to be professional? So I guess it could mean a few things. Being a professional archive kind of means being recognised and integrated into a wider archival community, I feel. Keeping up to date with Australian and global archival standards, which are at a very high level and have been for quite some time. And Australia has been right at the forefront of making those standards and introducing new ways of archiving. Developing strong policies and practices and being part of archival movements and contemporary archival thinking, and even helping to train the next generation of archivists, which we do quite a lot. We have a lot of students come in.
So what would you say are sort of the top couple of things that a professional archivist, because of that training, is thinking about and doing while they're at work?
What do you tell us every single day that we should be thinking and doing?
Or what are we doing and thinking about every day?
Don't use a guillotine on your collection material.
We don't use the guillotine on our collection material anymore. We've hidden the guillotine and we hide the scissors sometimes. But as professional archivists, and we look to professional standards, as I mentioned before, to think about our work. So while obviously each archive will need to work a little bit differently to different standards according to their resources and according to the material and how big or small they are, lots of work has been done on these standards globally to instill best practice, both globally and on a local scale. And archivists use these standards to get the very best outcomes for both collection management and access. And another thing, I guess, probably the next most important thing for a professional archivist to think about, I think, is thinking about the C word, which is context. When the archival profession was born, at the beginning of the 20th century, the understanding of the archivist was that of a neutral protector of the truth, one who would sit nobly at a desk and number the boxes and put the files away and protect, the truth, which was the written record. Now we understand that no history is unbiased, so our memories, both collectively and individually, are shaped by all of our perceptions of the world, our experiences, our social perceptions, our spiritual perceptions, our experiences, and more. The way that we see the world is the way that we record the world. So it's an archivist's job to constantly seek to understand the context of the material, so that others too may interpret it through their own eyes and through their own experiences as well, and be part of a community of understanding and a collective memory, but also their own personal experience. Yeah, I think that's what a professional archivist thinks about.
Turn my mic back on. And I thought we'd have just a quick little recap of some of the more significant things that have happened. Maybe let's go to the significant projects that we've done as a team since we all got brought on in 2022. What would you say, from your perspective, are some of the most important things that we've done since then?
Well, from my perspective, I think we built a website, and kind of didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Well, it felt like just another thing that we were doing, but upon reflection, it was such a huge thing to make our collection accessible to the rest of the world, and we didn't have that ability. And now we can not only, people can look at the index themselves, but they can also put in a request in, they can donate, they can find out about the synods, they can learn about the church, and also they can learn how to understand their own records. And surely, I don't know, Bethany, our phone queries about what we take and what we don't take have gone down considerably. And our requests have gone up.
But our research requests have gone up.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Which is what we want
to
be doing. So making things accessible rather than telling people who we are. We've done a lot of redress, working with redress with the church and with Indigenous communities and repatriation and healing in the last few years, I would say, and that's been a big thing that we've concentrated on, and we're really proud of the work that we do with Indigenous Aboriginal communities throughout Australia. That's been a huge thing that, we've done. Yeah, I don't know.
I think rehousing.
Rehousing.
The amount of rehousing we've done in the last 40 years has been
It's true.
huge.
Yeah, there's been a lot of boxes.
A lot of boxes.
Yeah.
Which has been good. It's because it means that we've... Yeah, sorry. We've done a lot of rehousing, so we've put a lot of... And lots of people say, why are you taking it out of the old boxes and putting it just into new boxes? Well, it allows us to look at the way that they've actually been stored. It allows us to look at the material to see whether the material was correctly described when it was put in there. There's a lot of really great description lists, etc., but to check that those things are correct with added knowledge. That's been a really good thing, and part of that has been the rehousing of the artefacts. We've got a massive amount of map drawers now, so a lot of our large flat material is now stored. I think that's actually, because it also tidies things up, and that just soothes an archivist's soul slightly, to have things tidy. Believe me, it's what we have to do to Angela continuously, is put things away.
And I would say the biggest change for me has been the digitisation program. Ben systematically went through and has been digitising all of our congregation registers. This has made a massive difference to my day-to-day, because it now sometimes only takes me a couple of seconds to fulfil a researcher's request.
I was going to say, I found out today, I didn't quite know when we got our overhead scanner, but it was in 2018, thanks to quite a lot of money from the New South Wales district and also from FoLA. And that has been just incredible, like, to digitise on demand and systematically, and especially the registers, because the registers are our most used collection. They're not just most accessed, and that's why they're important, but they have so much information about the congregations, not just by what's in them, but what they look like, and what the writing is like, and who had them, and things like that. So, to look after them properly is good. Yep.
Alrighty. Well, let's just about wrap things up, I think. I've got a couple more photos because I thought we really had to get things into the present day. We got a new building. As you're aware, we're no longer at Archer Street. We outgrew Archer Street, and we also, people wanted to buy the land that it was on, of course, and so we ended up in a new purpose-built archive out in Bowden. See some of the progress photos there.
Isn't that lower spec?
I think it might be. I think it might be. Farewell to Archer Street where's my notes here? I can't read that far, I'm blind. Which was promptly turned into a car park. It was demolished and turned into the car park for the Archer Street Hotel. The new archives were dedicated in November 2003. As you can see, with music and singing in great
It's a stunning
fanfare.
picture, Lyle. The lighting is very good.
And we still have those musicians there every day.
I wish we did.
Before the volunteers turn up.
Here we are today. Of course, presentation would not be complete without mentioning the work of Rachel Kuckel. This photo was from a thing that the archives put out in 2012 called About Time, and I just always thought this was a great little article and a great photo of Rachel having a great time at her job. So she was in 2009. and she became the director in 2014. And so obviously she was the one responsible for bringing all of us on. And as was mentioned in the reports earlier during the AGM, she had a real gift for advocacy, for finding grant money, and for she did so much to advance the collection during her time as director that we're very thankful for. Some other photos of other staff as well, Dana and Jeanette. And of course the iconic trio that many of you would be familiar with, Adam, Rachel and Jeanette, who were there for many years as well. They all, well, Adam and Jeanette left for other opportunities at the end of 2021, and Rachel was having baby number 3. And so they had to bring on a new team to come and babysit the archives. And that was the 3 of us. So here we are in 2022 when we started.
We look so young.
Yeah. And here we are now. Well, here we are last year. Here we are today. And of course, as we mentioned and acknowledged again during the AGM, Rachel, after her, was it 11 years as director?
Yeah, 11.
She moved on at the beginning of 2025 to work for Australian Lutheran World Service. I think they saw her stellar work with communication, advocacy, applying for grants, all of that sort of thing. And so she's moved on to take those skills into charity work there. And so at the moment, the archives, it's the 3 of us. If you come in and visit us, it's one of us that you're going to meet. And some of the other people that you might meet is our volunteers. We thought it would be a nice thing to do at the end of this presentation. Anybody here who's a current or past archives volunteer, if you wanted to come forward, we thought everyone should acknowledge your work and give you a little round of applause, so people can see who's here.
I can see at least 2.
We've got Bruce.
Stand up.
Mate, why don't you guys stand up?
Stand up.
Stand up in your seats.
Oh, 3. John Tammy at the back.
Yeah.
And
Lois has got to stand up. Yeah.
Lois Sweet down the front, she's done everything.
Yeah.
Bruce
Incredible.
Dobbins, who is a gun register indexer, and Lyle Kupke, who basically...
Lyle does everything.
Everything, very much.
If
like
we don't know
Lois.
something, we go to Lyle.
If we can't make Lois do it, Lyle will do it.
So thank you very much to you all. I think that's all she wrote. There you go.
Okay, has anybody got any questions after all that? Yes, just a minute. Hang on.
Fire drills.
No. That's a good idea, though, hey? We've never set fire to anything.
Okay, any other questions? Yes?
This is a suggestion to the archives. There are many people, particularly in the Barossa Valley particularly, and other places which have private collections. And these are extremely important collections. For instance, I'm interested in the early church music books. So I know of people who've got them from 1835 and earlier, and they're in their private collections. I won't mention them because what they are, or because security issue. And they've said to me, "What about insurance?" And I said, "You can't replace it if it goes up in fire." So I suggested, and this is something that the archives could suggest, is if they don't want to give it to the archives, scan the thing, and then for the person to put it in a bank vault somewhere and just pay the rent on the bank vault, because that's the only way you can actually keep it from being destroyed. So this is a solution that I suggested to this person, and it may be it's a suggestion that the archives could put out to people, because there are, and you may know some of these people in the Barossa Valley, have very valuable things from very early times in the Barossa Valley. For example, they may have a first edition of Pilgrim's Travels, in German that was published in Tanunda. Things like this.
Thank you. Insurance is a real problem, really, and I'm treasurer of the Barossa Valley Archives, and we don't insure our artefacts. You can't, because for one person it's rubbish, and to another person it could be $100,000. And so you find it very difficult for an insurance company to put a meaningful value of insurance on artefacts. And it's probably like that everywhere. So, yeah, so you got to try and protect things as best you can. You might have noticed with the pictures back here before, Chris Lockwood's father was one of those pictures up there, Pastor Mackenzie, and Gilbert's uncle, J.E. Materney, is Gilbert's uncle. Okay, now. Oh, okay, yes. Okay, any further questions? If not, I'll call on Dr. Dean Sweck to move voter. Thanks.
Yeah, I saw that picture. Sorry. Well, we have 3 favourite archivists, faithful favourite archivists. And it was just wonderful to hear the story of 100 years. This could have been really boring. And you guys, you just made this story come alive, and you laced it with so much just rollicking good humour, acting out, you know, when there was one side and the other. We used to say, oh, not bad for the other side, you know. So thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. And the way you presented it was like a celebration, and that's what it is. We're celebrating 100 years of archives. And it was fun. It was delightful, but this is a really important, this is our story, isn't it? And it's such a biblical thing to preserve the story. That's the scriptures preserve the story, and the archives preserve our story in all kinds of wonderful ways and share it. I like the bit towards the end, Angela, about how we're getting this story out using modern technology. Yes, terrific story. Just on a personal note, when I was 1959, when I was about 12 years old, starting at Concordia, old Dr. Blaze was still the archivist of the ELCA, and he was headmaster of Concordia, and he was archivist, and you could, I think sometimes he got the archives room, he'd wander down to the classrooms just to see how we're going, and it was a pretty warm afternoon, and he trudged into the room and he said, well, how's everyone today? And one kid called Sanders piped up, pretty red, Fred, because we'd been running around in the playground. We're all red. And Dr. Blaze did not say a word, but I could just see the corners of his mouth smiling when he said that. Yes, so thank you so much. And is there a gift? We might have to split the gift.
Bethany doesn't drink, so she got
Hey?
chocolate. Bethany doesn't drink, so
Okay.
got chocolate.
Good.
It's a gift for Bethany for having it put up with me.
Well, you might be able to take these to the archives and share them around a little bit.
This sounds like a great
Yeah.
idea. Yep.
So put your hands together and thank them. Yeah.
Thank you, Dean. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that. They put a lot of effort into it. I hope Pastor Stephen Schultz didn't find too difficult to sort of listen to some of that, with emphasis on support from the church. So, look, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Please stay for supper. And as Lois mentioned to us earlier on, our next meeting is on Pastor Oster. So we hope that you come along to that as well. Is there anything else that anybody needs to put forward? If not, thank you all, and please enjoy supper. If anybody hasn't signed the visitor's book, please do that. Thank you.